Ken had emailed out and said, pointed out that this is Christ the King Sunday. And I will say it was providential in that this message ended up being the one at the very end of the series. I really hadn't been, what I had done is I had gauged as to when Advent started. And that's what I was watching for. But it just so happened that this was the one that ends the series and leads us into Advent next week. And although it might seem unusual, it is good and appropriate to remind ourselves once again of Jesus' work on Good Friday as we get ready to go into the anticipation of Advent and Christmas to come, because they are the great bookends, as it were. If it weren't for the coming of Jesus, we wouldn't have the cross and the resurrection. But without the cross and the resurrection, the birth of Jesus really doesn't have any meaning. And so it is only when they are all together that the whole great story truly makes sense. Hold on just a second. Thank you. In our hurry this morning, I forgot my water. And so, 2 services without water. It's time to put my bed dry. I do want to say very quickly, and I will hand this off here in a bit, but this has been sitting in my stack of papers for a while. I've been meaning to get it to the church, but this is the thank you for 100% apportionments last year. So give yourselves a round of applause. That is something to celebrate. And know that you are supporting the ministry of our conference. So with that said, as we observe Christ the King Sunday, the last Sunday in Ordinary Time, and we're looking forward to decorating here in just a little bit. I'll try to not take too long here. But we're going to talk about the last of the broken signposts, that being power. And I'm going to use an illustration that maybe I've used in the past, and that is board games. My favorite board game that Esther and I play, and we have a lot. If you haven't seen the picture of our game room, if you want to know, we can show you a picture a little later. But we've got a lot of board games. But I would say our favorite one is a game called Sight. I won't bore you with the details of how it's played, but it is a competitive game. Believe it or not, there are board games now that are not competitive, that are cooperative games. But this is a competitive game. And it is one where you're trying to build up the strongest economy and the strongest military presence in a region while not going into full-blown war. In short, it is a Cold War kind of game, which is appropriate for the world that we live in today. But there are a number of ways that you get points in the game. And one of the ways that you can get points is by accomplishing an objective card. They're a secret. You get 2 of them at the beginning of the game. You can only try to achieve one of them unless you have a special something going on. But generally, you can only achieve one. And it's kept secret. Your opponent doesn't know what your objective is. And one game, I was bound and determined to accomplish one of the cards that was called Become a Beloved Pacifist. And to do so, you had to accomplish certain things in the game without building up any power whatsoever or having developed any weapons. It was a very difficult thing to do in the game. But I managed to do it. But Esther won the game. So the lesson from the game, pacifists don't win. And this reflects, I thought on this and realized it is a reflection of our worldly view of power. Power in the earthly sense equates to the ability to destroy or the threat of destruction or death. That is, if you boil any authority or power down, you might say, well, my boss doesn't threaten to kill me. Not directly. But if you consider the world that we live in, they do have the ability to terminate your employment. And if you don't have employment, you can't make money. If you can't have money, you can't have food. And if you don't eat, you will die. The ability to compel another to do what you want by force. That is our worldly definition of power. Because of this, the notion of peace and pacifism is equated with an absence of power. Be a pacifist, one must become weak, is essentially the message of the world. Power is a very tricky and sticky thing, as our cousins across the pond sometimes say, a sticky wicket. We as Christians believe that God is all-powerful, and yet the world is still a mess. When our rulers use power, it usually ends up being abused, it seems. But if our leaders choose not to exert power, then we are left unprotected, exposed, and vulnerable to chaos. In short, if our rulers choose not to exert power and authority, then bad things happen. If our rulers choose to exert power and authority, well, oftentimes bad things happen. Power seems like all of the other ideas and concepts we have discussed these past couple of months to be another broken signpost. And this is the last one. And honestly, this is the one on which all the others hinge. Because we could set all of the others right, but if power is not set right, then it means nothing. Because if death has the final say, it doesn't matter how beautiful we can make anything, or how just we could be, or how honest and truthful we could be. If death has the final say, then it all means nothing. If God is all-powerful, but the world is in the state that it is in, we must rethink power if we are to better understand God's plan of salvation and our role in it. Only when we look at power through a Christ-shaped lens can the signpost of power be put upright again. And so we return again to the climax of John's Gospel, the confrontation between Pilate and Jesus. Pilate comes across as sympathetic in many ways, especially when he first starts talking to Jesus. He seems to have wanted to let Jesus go, but make no mistake, he is also fully Roman. Listen to his words. Don't you know I have the authority, the power to set you free or put you to death on a cross? If we watch their interchange carefully, we can begin to see how power has been distorted by the shadow and what true godly power looks like. But first, let's come to understand the earthly view of power. Pilate says it all. I have the authority to kill. From the moment humanity chose to discern good and evil on its own terms, we began exercising power as a means of manipulation and destruction. We have fought many, many wars claiming God is with us. And being in Abraham Lincoln's hometown, I like a quote that I once read from him during the middle of the Civil War. He said, the question isn't if God is with us or with the South, but are we on God's side? We declare, we condemn, we choose what is right in our own eyes, and we use force to get it. Look at our world today. Nothing has really changed. We may think we are more civilized and advanced, but we just have robots and drones that do the killing for us. Because of this, many people believe now that power in itself is evil and that power needs to be taken away. But historically speaking, nature abhors, dislikes a vacuum. And in times past, and we don't even have to look that far back in history, times when we have taken out and removed dictators from the scene, and then we leave, what tends to happen is after we leave, anarchy fills the void, and pretty soon a new dictator comes to bring order to the chaos. No, power is not the enemy. It is how we use power. It is how we use power that is the problem. So back to my analogy of the board game earlier. The assumption in the game was that pacifism and peace equals a lack of power and is weakness. But the truth is much different. In Mark chapter 10, when James and John are asking if they can sit at the right and left hand of Jesus when he comes in his glory, these were seen as the positions of power and authority in a kingdom. The chief stewards of the kingdom sat to the king's left and right. And then Jesus explains to them and the disciples, saying, if you want to be great or powerful in my kingdom, you're not going to do it in the way that our neighbors, the Gentiles, in particular the Romans, do. Instead of bossing each other around with threats of violence, the greatest will be the one who serves the most. He says, the greatest among you will be servant to all. The first will be last, and the last will be first. The Son of Man came to serve, not be served. And it says that he gave his life up as a ransom for many. Jesus held all the power in the universe, and he never abandoned his power. He used it to lift up the weak, to build up those who were hurt, to heal the sick, to speak truth to earthly distortions of power, the truth of a kingdom that brings life out of death. You see, if the earthly view of power places death as the ultimate power, and if Jesus says, I came to bring life from death, and he reveals it through raising Lazarus from the dead, and ultimately when he himself of his own volition steps out of a grave, then what is the greater power? We have been fooled to believe that the most powerful ones are the ones who can kill the most. The truth is, the most powerful are the ones who can serve and lift up the most. Paul says, for this reason, when I am weak, then I am strong. Going back to the civil rights movement, there were some leaders who advocated violence to achieve the ends of equality, but Dr. Martin Luther King advocated non-violent protest, and guess who was the most instrumental in getting the Civil Rights Act passed? Peace and love are not weak. It is stronger than any form of violence. Let's go back to Jesus and Pilate and see. We see two kingdoms confronting each other. One kingdom of death, exemplified by Rome. But Jesus' kingdom is not like those of earth. His followers don't fight because that is not where real strength is. Real strength is being willing to give one's last measure out of love for others. And that is what Jesus will do. In going to the cross, he revealed the powers of the world as weak. An innocent man willingly died an unjust death for humanity. And he could have stopped it the whole time. That is real power. And Jesus' resurrection is proof positive of the greater power of love and selflessness. Until Jesus' kingdom fully arrives, it is already coming. Jesus inaugurated it in his resurrection. It is already coming, but it will not be fully consummated until Christ comes again. Until it fully arrives, the Holy Spirit works in the lives of believers to continue Jesus' work of serving others. As Jesus said to Peter at the closing of John, feed my sheep. The Spirit empowers us, again as Paul said, when I am weak, then I am strong. We aren't called to fight in the earthly way of fighting. We exert godly power when we are willing to serve like Christ did, love like Christ did, and yes, if necessary, to die like Christ did. He reflected the command that we see in Psalm 72. Give your love of justice to the king, O God, and righteousness to the king's son. Help him judge your people in the right way. Let the poor always be treated fairly. When we do this, we find power revealed as the power of God to make all things new. Christ, it says in Colossians chapter 1, Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. And through him, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things we can see and the things we can't see, such as thrones, kingdoms, rulers, and authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through him and for him. The signposts we have looked at these past weeks all point to Christ as the fulfillment of all things. To help us to look to him for all of our needs, all of our answers, all of our hopes. When we look at the signposts of justice, love, spirituality, beauty, freedom, truth, and power, through a truly Christian lens, we open ourselves to be the hands and feet of Jesus in ways we never thought possible. And that is truly powerful indeed.